Tee. Welcome to the 2019 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series where your man Louie Tee aims to break down all 32 teams in the National Football League's 2019 NFL Draft. We're going to use our baseball grading scale to break down the 2019 NFL Draft. Single, double, triple, home run. There are no strikeouts here in the Draft Wrap-Up Series. As we cannot tell how these players are going to pan out, and I don't want to discount any of these young men before they get their chance in the National Football League. And so, we'll get a score for each and every single player selected in said team's draft. We'll apply bonuses when necessary, get an aggregate score, divide by the number of picks, which will yield us an overall grade for that team's draft. We'll then move on to the next team in the series. But seeing as if this is the last team in the series, no need in going through the process to which getting your team up is necessary. So I got a lot to say about this final team in this series, the Los Angeles Rams, the runner-up in the NFL a season ago. What I've found is that teams that don't win the Super Bowl, they go through, and I'm talking about fans. Let me specify this. Fans of teams who don't win the Super Bowl, especially when you come close. Maybe if you go to the Super Bowl, you get your ass whooped, it's a little bit easier to swallow, I guess. It's still a bitter pill, but I guess it's easier to swallow. It's a lot smaller of a pill. But if you come close and you feel like, play here, play there, and you lose by less than a touchdown, or maybe you lose by, let's call it less than 10 points in a Super Bowl, and you were right there, and you feel like, play here, play there, you could have won, and it could have been a different outcome, then it becomes a very bitter pill to swallow. One of those huge horse pills. And what I think I'm going to term this is Super Bowl slumber for fans of teams who don't win the Super Bowl but come dangerously close. I watched my sister go through this as an Atlanta Falcons fan some 3 years ago, 2016, with their 28-3 meltdown and lost to the Patriots. And my barber, King Coop, you all know him well, is a Rams fan. And it's not just him, but I want to use him as an example. He didn't want to talk football for, let's call it, and this is a guy that we talk football all the time. I go in the shop, and probably after we exchange pleasantries and we talk about family matters, sometimes we don't even get to family matters first before we talk football. We talk ball first, and then we talk about family, or vice versa. But we always talk ball. He wanted no parts of talking Rams, really no parts of talking football, period, for about a good 2-month stretch after the Super Bowl. So there's a little bit of this slumber, and it kind of bled into the draft as well. And I'm seeing that with the Rams fans in general. This used to be one of the fan bases that when I started this series, they were going to get their team up, one of the first teams in the series. Like, I wasn't going to go 10, 15 teams into the series before 10 Rams fans are banding together, like having shifts to make sure that the Rams are going to be next. And this year, not a peep out of these guys. I mean, I might have seen an appearance from 1 or 2 Rams fans. My man Q-Bone might have peeked in once or twice, but he's like, man, not trying to get in. It's too competitive. I haven't seen any Rams fans looking to get their team up in the series. And I think a lot of that has to do with a little bit of fatigue from the loss. And I'm going to call it Super Bowl slumber. We talk about Super Bowl hangovers for the teams that win and don't have success the next year. How about a Super Bowl slumber for the teams that don't win the Super Bowl, come very close, and there's a mental fatigue that comes with, damn it, we were so close. And the NFL isn't like the NBA, isn't like Major League Baseball, where if you're a really good team, you'll have another shot next year. The NFL is so tough because anything can happen. Injuries can happen. The ball can bounce the other way. It's set up for parity. And unlike MLB and especially the NBA, where the best teams are going to win, in the NFL, that's not usually the case. So at least unless you're talking about the New England Patriots, of course. But at the end of the day, I'm surprised that the Rams are last. I said all of that to say this. I'm surprised the Rams are last, but then again, I probably shouldn't be because I know how this story ends. I know how this movie goes. And I've seen this unfold before. And the Rams aren't the first, nor will they be the last fan base to kind of feel the effects of not winning the Super Bowl, but coming so close. It was a magic carpet ride for them last year. It didn't end the way they wanted it to. And I think they're still kind of, they're getting out of it slowly but surely. The new season is about to be upon us, and they're going to wake up from that slumber. And they're going to say, all right, we're back. Let's go try to get this thing done this year. But I think some of them are still kind of in that malaise, if you will. But I said all of that to say this. It's the Rams. I'm always fascinated by teams at the back end of the first round of the draft and how you approach. So I'm going to give you what I think the Rams did in this draft and what their mindset was going into the first round of this draft, because I'm always fascinated with what you do at the back end of a first round. Because if you're a good team, if you're a perceived good team, if you're New England, if you're Minnesota a couple of years ago when they were in the NFC Championship game, if you're the Eagles and they've been picking late in the draft the last few years, how do you handle the first round? You know, the other rounds of the draft, 2nd through 7th, they go as they go. But the first round is really interesting as to how good teams generally handle it. I'll talk about that here in a second, but let's introduce this draft. Les Snead and company have really done a good job of keeping this team stocked and chocked full of talent. But really what they've done is they really built this team through free agency and kind of supplemented the rest of the roster via the draft, which is not really how you're supposed to do it. That's kind of backwards. You're supposed to build your team through the draft and supplement the rest of your roster through free agency. A lot of the best players on this Rams team came from free agency. Obviously, never, ever trust a man with 2 first names. Aaron Donald is arguably one of the best players, if not the best player in all of football. A 2-time reigning NFL MVP. That's something that's up for debate in terms of the strategy of the Rams via the draft. But he's obviously a draft pick. But you look at their football team and a lot of their household names, a lot of the guys that they're really relying on for production have come from other places. And so I think they've got to do a better job of getting elite talent in the draft. They have kind of said, you know what, not really worried about getting a guy in the first round. We're more concerned with the guys in the 3rd round. They got 3 third-round picks in this draft. We're more concerned with getting guys in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th than we are in the first round. That's cool. And I guess when you're a team that feels like you're on the cusp of doing something major like the Rams are, you can afford to not have a guy on a 5th-year option deal. You can afford to go for quantity over quality. But I generally like quality over quantity. That's generally my thing. So let's talk about this draft. And I've got a couple of nuggets and some ideas and some thoughts. And I want to hear from you, especially if you're a Rams fan, what you think about some of these scenarios I'm posing to you and how I view the Rams' outlook on this particular draft and even drafts in the past. Let's jump into this draft, though. We start in the 2nd round. Rams traded out of the 1st round. And so their first selection didn't come into the 2nd round. Remember, last year they didn't have a 1st or a 2nd round pick because they traded away those selections in order to get players onto their roster, i.e. Brandon Cooks and so forth and so forth. Aqib Talib, Marcus Peters, all those guys, those cost draft picks. So again, they're not so much focused on the draft as they are free agency and getting established veterans. When you're this close, though, I understand the logic. Nonetheless, 2nd round, 61st pick overall, defensive back out of Washington, Taylor Rapp gets this Rams draft underway. So I want to pose a couple of thoughts, and I'm drawing inferences here, and I'm making assumptions, and I could be wrong. You know what they say when you make an assumption. But in any event, this is how I think the Rams viewed the first round. And I stumbled over an interesting nugget when doing my homework on the Rams leading up to this draft. And I found something pretty interesting. The Rams haven't invested a top 90 pick. So the first 90 picks of the draft, first 90 selections in any given draft. Since 2014, they have not invested a top 90 pick on a defensive football player since, you guessed it, never, ever trust a man with 2 first names, Aaron Donald. Since they selected him, what was it, 13th, 14th overall, somewhere in there in 2014, they haven't invested another top 90 defensive selection in the draft. Isn't that amazing? That you could have gone 4 whole drafts, now 5 years, once you hit 2019, but that drought would stop in this year's draft. But Isn't that amazing that you can go an entire 4 years without spending a first, second, or an early third round pick on a defensive player? 4 straight years in the draft? That is mind-boggling. I did not know that. I didn't realize it, but that's how they've been spending their resources. Whether they haven't had a first, second round pick like last year when their first pick was Joseph Noteboom out of TCU, a tackle, or they're just spending their first and second round selections and early third round selections on offensive players. So that was a staggering stat that I saw that I almost found it hard to believe, but it is true. The earliest pick they've spent on a defensive player was John Johnson in the third round a couple of years ago, and that was after 90. So anyway, here's my thought process on the Rams in the first round. And really teams at the back end of the first round. When you're a good football team, and I'm really talking teams that make it to the championship game in their respective conference and to the Super Bowl. So you're talking about the final 4 picks of the first round. So you're talking about 30, 31, 32, 29 through 32, essentially. And I look at the Rams, and you look at teams that finish at the back end of the first round, especially teams in the Super Bowl. And I think this is the thought process that they have. We're looking for maybe a select few players. They may have a list of 3 or 4 guys that they really love. And that list may be even narrower, maybe 2 players that they're saying themselves, if this guy is here, we're not moving. We're going to take this guy because he fits exactly what we're looking for, and it's tremendous value at the back end of the first round. If he's not there, or if either one of those players or none of those players that we covet and desire aren't there at, say, 31, and let's go with the Rams and their pick in the first round, then we're going to move. We're going to move out of the first round. There's generally someone that always wants to trade back into the first round. There's a player there that they didn't expect to be there, that's sitting there, and they want that 5th-year option potential on that player. And so they want back into the first round. You're always going to have those teams that are willing to move back out of the first round and back into the second and pick up more picks and get value that way because they don't see the value in the players that are left available at the back end of the first round. So I think the Rams looked at it this way. They said, look, we're going to either take a safety or one particular player on the defensive line. And I think the thought process, and maybe they could have loved a guy like Jerry Tillery. I don't think they were really that high on Tillery necessarily, but they may have been if he was there. Maybe they stay at 31 and say, you know what, we're going to make the selection. But he went off the board to the Chargers 4 picks prior. But nonetheless, I think they were saying to themselves, if Jeffrey Simmons drops to us, and it was a distinct possibility that a guy that would have easily been a top 10, for sure top 15 pick, if not for the injury, would have been available at 31, they would have taken him because you put him next to Aaron Donald and you're talking about a defensive line that could dominate for years to come. And so I think that was something that would have been in play. Obviously, they've taken defensive linemen in the first round for years. Going back to AD and Brockers and Long and all of those guys that they had along the defensive line for years as first-round picks. But I think that was a guy that they really said, if he's there, we're going to take him. We're not moving because we're getting tremendous value on a guy that, we're going to redshirt him. He's not going to play this year because of the injury, but that's cool. We don't have to have him now, but when he does come up and show up for us, he's going to show up in a major way. I think that was a guy that they looked at. And then I think they also said, hey, we've got a couple of safeties that we really love. And both of them happen to go in the first round. I think they love Darnell Savage Jr. and his versatility. I think it kind of reminds them of what they had in LaMarcus Joyner, but a better version of LaMarcus Joyner. And then I think they also said, hey, we wouldn't mind taking Jonathan Abram. I think it's more so Savage, though, because Abram, to me, kind of fits in that John Johnson mold a bit. And I think they would have preferred to have a guy with a little bit more versatility like a Darnell Savage Jr. So I'm thinking those 2 players were the guys that they coveted at 31, and neither were there. So they said, nah, really don't have anything keeping us at 31. Let's get out of here. So that's what I think. I don't know what you guys think, but that's what a lot of teams do. The Patriots do this every year. Seattle, generally picking at the back end of the first round. They love trading out of the first round. I think that's the thought process is if our guy or guys are available, then we'll take one of them. But if the guys that we want, and it's a specific elite select group, it may be 2 players, it may only be 1 player. If those guys aren't there, we're getting out. In any event, I'm rambling. Let's get to the Rams draft. And let's get to their needs. What I deem to be their needs. You could disagree, but these are the needs that I thought that they had to address. And really, when you're in the Super Bowl, and you really don't have as many glaring needs, and the Rams really don't have a ton of glaring needs. What they're really planning for is the future, and they've done a tremendous job of doing this. They've done a great job, and I've really got to give them credit. They've done a great job of short-term planning, these one-year deals, a lot of cap being eaten up in a year, but then that money comes off the books and they're free and able to have cap flexibility in the next year and years to come. They've done a lot of good things with their cap. And you wonder how they're able to pay all these guys buku money, because they're doing smart things with their cap. A lot of money being spent in the short term, but it's freeing up cap space for the next year and years to come. So they put themselves in a position where they're able to have cap flexibility. So when you look at their roster, they've done a good job of supplementing their roster with draft picks and filling it up with a bunch of free agents that can help them right now, like an Eric Weddle, for example. He comes free from Baltimore. They pounce, grab him on a 2-year deal. So now safety, although it's the biggest need you have, it's not the biggest need in 2019, but it's the biggest need potentially moving forward. That's why it's the first need on my list. You love John Johnson. He was outstanding last year, but how long are you going to get quality play out of Eric Weddle? He could fall off the cliff at the beginning of 2019, and you could see it early on in the season and realize, all right, the reason the Ravens let him go is because they saw this coming, and so we're going to go ahead and put Taylor Rapp in the game, which is the guy you just drafted. You're planning for the future. He could be outstanding in 2019 for you, and then 2020, you're like, he's starting to tail off at the back end of the season. Don't know if we want to keep him around. We're going to cut him in the offseason. Taylor Rapp's going to get his opportunity to start as a second-year player in the league. That's the kind of the foresight that these guys have, and that's the kind of ability that they have because of some of the smart spending that they've done. Offensive line, to me, it's just a big need because obviously your tackle is 37 years old. Your left tackle, that is 37 years old, and you didn't know if he was going to come back or not. Andrew Whitworth is a rock for you on that offensive line, one of your leaders in that locker room. And so he decided to come back, which gives you another year to be able to plan for the future when he's done. You have Rob Havenstein on the right side, but you drafted Joseph Noteboom. I don't know how you feel about him, but I look at your guard situation. Jamon Brown moved on, and a lot of shuffling in there. No more John Sullivan at center. So again, you drafted Brian Allen a couple of years ago out of Michigan State. So you should be able to mitigate some of these losses. But again, you want to prepare yourself for the future. Injuries happen. Depth is necessary along the offensive line. You want to see the demise of a good football team quickly in a season. See the offensive line depth be tested early and often, and you'll watch a team that struggles. Jared Goff has to be protected. And so you need depth along that offensive line. I think you were able to achieve some of that in this draft. Cornerback, look, you're fine at cornerback. You look at the roster, you've got corners, you should be fine. But both of the guys you traded for last year in Marcus Peters and Aqib Talib are both free agents after the 2019 season. Are both of those guys going to be back? Aqib Talib's getting up there in age. I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you this much. In the event that they're not back, guess what? You want to have guys already on the roster in your system, in your scheme, that understand what you're looking for from them. So cornerback for me is a need that you needed to hit in this draft. Linebacker, no more Mark Barron. He's been injured. You finally moved on from him. And so you look at the linebacker position, just think you need more depth there. It's really simple. You just need more depth. I think you're going to give Micah, the linebacker from Virginia you drafted, I believe, last year. I think you're going to give him, Micah Kaiser, an opportunity to really get more play at linebacker. So we'll see how the linebacker situation shakes out. Just thought you could use some depth there. Running back, obviously, Todd Gurley last year. He's an all true man, yeah, baby. Todd Gurley, don't you call him Gurley. Last year, didn't finish out the season like an all true man. All right? And there were questions about injury and health and moving forward. And I talked about it on the podcast, Louie Tee Network podcast. Check that out. Available on Stitcher, Google Music Play, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, and of course the website, LouieTeeNetwork.net. All right? Louie Tee Network podcast. Check that out. But I talked about it on my podcast. Is Todd Gurley really going to be scaled back? Like, are we really worried about this man's knee that badly? He's already come out and said, I'm fine. I've had worse issues. I came into the league with a knee issue. I'm good. I've seen worse. Trust me, I'm fine. But You lose C.J. Anderson in the offseason. I thought for sure he was going to be back after the season that he turned in at the back end for you guys into the postseason. Without C.J. Anderson, I shudder to think what would have happened to this team in the postseason because Todd Gurley was not right. And furthermore, I don't think the staff trusted him with his health at the end of the season into the postseason. So you needed C.J. Anderson. I thought you were going to bring him back. Instead, you elected to bring back Malcolm Brown. I'm not mad at that. That's your stuff. That's homegrown stuff. You decided to keep him in-house, but in doing so, you allowed C.J. Anderson to go to the Detroit Lions. Cool. You need to address running back then. And you did that in this draft as well. And then finally, defensive line. Look, no more Ndamukong Suh. He was solid for you, but it was up and down. You didn't really know what you were getting. I thought he was outstanding in the postseason, though. I thought you got your best play out of him come postseason time. But again, it was a one-year rental. You got what you got out of him. You moved on. And you just need more depth there. That's all that is at this point. You're just looking for depth, and that's why it's at the back end of your needs. It's not necessary. You've got stuff there. You've got guys in place that can give you production, but you're just looking for more depth along the defensive line. So with that being said, let's jump into Taylor Rapp and what he brings to the table. Here's a guy, 6 feet, 208 pounds. He's not a first-round pick in my estimation, but a lot of people were talking him up as a first-round pick, and he might have landed in the first-round pick if he'd have run a better 40. If this guy would have ran a 4.5, 240, he might have snuck into the back end of the first round. But because he ran a 4.77 and he was dealing with a groin injury, he plays much faster than 4.77. So I think a lot of people were in their mind willing to dismiss it, but the numbers are what they are. And you can't convince a coaching staff, you can't convince a GM to roll the dice with a first round pick on a defensive back that's running a sub 4 or sub 4.8, a 4.77 or 4.75. It's hard to convince a guy to spend a first round pick on a defensive back that's running north of 4.7. So I think that really was what got him to the second round. But that being said, you got some good value here because even though I thought he was going to fall out of the first round, I didn't think he was going to fall to basically the third round, which, 61st pick in the draft, you're essentially talking back into the second round. So this is actually tremendous value for you, and it meets a position of need. Speaking of which, let's take care of the need of safety. Take that off the board as Taylor Rapp fits that need for you here in the second round. A versatile safety that operates like a Swiss Army knife. Can do just about everything except handle single high safety duties. His football IQ, underneath coverage, man or zone, tackling ability, blitzing capabilities, and aggressiveness are all exceptional. All right. If not for his slow 40 time, he's probably a first round pick. I didn't believe that whether he ran a 4.5 or a 4.4 or not, but a lot of people think he would have been a first round pick. Nonetheless, Rapp will be a durable defensive chess piece for some fortunate defensive coordinator, in this case, Wade Phillips in Los Angeles. He's going to love this guy because I think he brings so many good traits and qualities to the table. Again, I talked about the football IQ already. Really smart player. I love his aggressiveness. I watched him blitz in one game versus Cal, and he nearly took the running back's head off. Now, he didn't get to the quarterback, but it was such an aggressive blitz that the next time that running back sees 7 coming at him like a runaway freight train, he may be thinking and making a business decision. I'm going to try to cut his ass. I don't want him running into me like that again. And if Taylor Rapp's smart, he'll be able to leap over that guy or maybe sidestep him and get to the quarterback. When you hit guys that hard once, it makes them rethink their priorities the next time around. And he's just such an aggressive football player. So you got to love that. And he just has that demeanor. He's really good in coverage. I feel like he's usually in the hip pocket of a tight end or a slot receiver. He's always around the football, just a really good football player. But he doesn't have the ability to play single high safety. I think if you're looking for him to be a cut the field in half, cover 2 safety, I think that would be a great fit for him. He's a guy that you can drop down in the box as an 8th defender and an underneath zone defender and all of those good things. And again, he can play away from the line of scrimmage. But like I said, I wouldn't trust him as a single high free safety. Don't think he has that red line speed. But there's a lot to like here with Taylor Rapp. And I think this is a guy that you feel good about getting here in the second round, 61st pick overall. My comp for him is Harrison Smith, the ex-Notre Dame Fighting Irish safety turned Minnesota Viking who has been outstanding in the league. Another guy that's under a defensive mastermind in Zim Zimmer, and Mike Zimmer in Minnesota, and he's gotten the most out of Harrison Smith. I think Wade Phillips would do much of the same in Los Angeles with Taylor Rapp. Second round, 61st overall selection, defensive back out of Washington. Taylor Rapp for me is. So you move on to the next pick, third round, 70th overall selection, running back out of Memphis, Darrell Henderson is the pick. So this is one of, I think, 3 third-round picks for the Rams. I don't necessarily love this pick, but again, I know a lot of people who do. And to me, you're splitting hairs on backs like this. Some of the things I like, I may be nitpicking. You know, I think he's a quality back, and you're not asking him to come in and fill a starting role. And I think the role you're going to ask him to feature in, I think he's going to be really good for you in that role. I thought there were other options potentially on the board at the time of this pick that would have made more sense, that would have fit this Rams offense and could have given you more. But again, it's my personal preference. You know, you might have loved Darrell Henderson. I've heard it said in a number of different ways. I'm going with Darrell. Or you could have loved David Montgomery or Motor Singletary. Those were guys that I loved. All right, guys that I loved that were still on the board at the time of this selection. So it is what it is. You know, I'm not gonna beat you up for doing what you felt like you needed to do. 5'8", 208 pounds, ran a 4.49. You see him on tape running by guys, so he's got some speed. A short, compact back with short strides and average wiggle, yet enough physicality to power through arm tackles and fast enough to hit the home run. His pass-catching prowess also makes him a receiving threat out of the backfield, adding to his versatility. Still, his size and limited MYM, make you miss, minimizes his ability to be elite at the NFL level. So I thought there were backs that could potentially be elite backs at this point of the draft that were still available. I just gave you the 2 that I loved in Motor Singletary and David Montgomery. Again, both of which were on the board at the time of this selection. But let's take running back off the board. That is a need in this draft, and you got rid of it here in the third round. And you obviously felt like you needed to address running back because of the situation with Todd Gurley and really wanting to take a little bit off of his plate and lighten his load a bit in 2019 and maybe moving forward. We'll see how that plays out because Gurley is a tough-minded guy that wants the snaps, he wants the carries, he wants the touches, but probably in his best interest to allow the Rams to work another back in consistently. Maybe that guy's Malcolm Brown. Maybe that guy is Darrell Henderson. We will see. But I comp him to Brandon Oliver, the ex-Los Angeles Chargers back that was undrafted out of Buffalo. Small-sized guy that could run and had a nice little brief stint with the Chargers that was impressive, but you could tell he was an overachiever. I don't necessarily know that to be the case of Darrell Henderson. I don't think he's an overachiever, and I think he can catch it better than Brandon Oliver can, but that's who I see when I see him. I'm not as high on him as a lot of other people are, but he does bring some versatility, can catch it out of the backfield, can do some things, and bring a different dimension to this offense that maybe you lacked a season ago when you didn't have a healthy Todd Gurley. So that, from that standpoint, I think he does bring something of some value to this roster. But in any event, third round, 70th pick overall, running back out of Memphis, Darrell Henderson for me is. Third round, 79th overall pick, defensive back out of Michigan, David Long is the selection. So I talked about the the Rams needing to address cornerback. I think it's imperative that you do something this year to put yourself in a position that in case next year, neither one of those guys you traded for in Marcus Peters and Aqib Talib are back. I think one of them will be back, preferably Peters, because he's the younger of the two. But you never know. You know how these things go. He could get injured. He could be a head case. We know he's been that in the past. He could have a down season, and you could be like, you know what, we're going to go in a different direction. You're probably going to command too much money. We don't think you're worth it. You know how these things go. So I firmly believe one of those guys will be back. But in the event that neither of them are back, you need to prepare yourself. Even if only one is back, you still need to put yourself in a position where you're going to have reinforcements ready to come in and pick up where those guys left off. And so I love this selection here of David Long, 5'11", buck 96. 4.45 40, 39.5-inch vert. This guy was electric at the combine. To me, he was one of the best, if not the best, corner at the combine. The corners, if you remember watching my combine coverage, they were awful. That day with the corners was just awful. It was almost one of the worst days as a whole that I've ever seen watching the combine in recent memory. But they were a bad group in general, and Long was one of the guys that stuck out as a positive on the day. And so that was really my first exposure to David Long, and I said, well, I've got homework to do on this guy because he was impressive. And what I found was he continued on the impressiveness from the combine on tape. So all he was doing was furthering that at the combine. If you were already familiar with David Long going into the combine, all he did was check off boxes for you because the tape is clean, man. I really am a huge fan of guys with his level of aggressiveness at the cornerback position. You know, I can't stand the often soft corners that like to give you 7 to 10 yards of cushion, and anything you want underneath, you can have. I'm good, man. Give me a guy that's up in your face, deleting the airspace, wants to really get in your jersey and make this thing a dogfight all day long and let you know, I'm going to be here, bro. You know, if you want to get some grabs, you're going to earn every single one. And generally, it's the guys that have this short man complex, this inferiority complex. Like, nope, I ain't 6'1". I don't give a shit. You 6'2". I'm still getting your shit. All right. Those are the guys that I think are the most feistiest and aggressive because they feel like they're getting disrespected because they don't have the size. And he plays like one of those guys that has a chip on his shoulder because somebody probably told him, if you were big enough. Only if you were big enough. And he's probably heard that one too many times. And so now he's out to prove that my size doesn't matter, man. I'm a baller. So I like what I saw on tape from David Long. Let me just say that. An aggressive press cover corner that lacks ideal size and length, but David Long never got that memo as he consistently gets in the face and deletes the airspace of wide receivers and generally stays in phase while bigger receivers will have the advantage over Long. He will fight and make them use that size to win consistently. Lacks elite closing burst, but he plays an aggressive brand of corner that makes him intriguing. Another question will be whether he can handle the slot if size demotes him inside to the slot. So when I look at him, I've always said this, and this goes for offensive linemen, this goes for corners, and the such. I'm not one of those guys that automatically says, hey, this guy's got to be relegated to slot or this guy's got to be kicked inside the guard if he was a tackle in college. I'm all about giving guys an opportunity. Now, obviously, if a dude's 5'9", probably going to be, with today's NFL, with these receivers getting bigger and bigger, it's probably going to be tough for him to play outside consistently. You're not going to find too many Antoine Winfields running around any longer. And these guys that are sub 5'10", getting an opportunity to play out wide. It's a different game now. But, you know, if a guy's 5'11", I mean, what's the difference between 5'11", and 6 feet? You know, again, we're talking about an inch. You know, there's a big difference between 5'9" and 6 feet, but not 6 feet and 5'11". So, again, if you're 5'11" and you have all of the tools necessary, I think that you should get a shot out wide. And I think David Long is going to get that opportunity. Again, they've got two corners right now that they really like, and so he may be relegated to slot duty. Who's to say? But if this is a guy that you think can play outside, I say you give him every opportunity to prove that he can before you say that he can't. And so my biggest knock on him right now isn't any really one trait necessarily other than, the lack of length and size. You'd like him to be 6'1" with 32, 33-inch arms. That's not the case. But bottom line is, the only doubt that I have is, okay, let's say that you say to yourself, he's probably better suited for the slot. Can he do it? I'm not sure. I didn't watch him do that a ton. He was on the outside exclusively for Michigan. So I don't know if he's capable of playing in the slot or not. I can tell you this much, though. He was locking dudes down. He was in dude's grill. Ball is being delivered, and he's right there at the point of catch trying to pick it off. So I really like David Long, and I really appreciate guys that play the brand of cornerback that he does. Those kind of guys endear themselves to me. So that's just one of my things. I love guys that play the cornerback position aggressively. He's one of them. Let's take cornerback off the board. It was one of your bigger needs in this draft, and you addressed that here in the third round, 79th overall selection, defensive back out of Michigan. David Long for me is my comp for David Long is Jordan Lewis, a fellow Wolverine that was drafted a couple of years ago by the Dallas Cowboys early in the draft, and similar type of size, similar type of mentality. The knock on Jordan Lewis was his size. He was a 5'10" corner, but he played like he was 6'1", similar to that Steve Smith mentality at the receiver position, where Steve Smith played like he was 6'3", but he was like 5'10". Same thing here with my guy David Long. I think he's got that same mindset as a Jordan Lewis. And again, I really tend to flock towards those guys in that kind of mindset when playing the cornerback position. You go to the next pick, the final of the Rams' third round selections, 3 in total, as I mentioned before. 97th overall, offensive lineman out of Oklahoma, Bobby Evans is the pick. So I talked about the Rams needing to address offensive line, and I didn't necessarily think that center was going to be as big on their to-do list as a lot of people thought because of the John Sullivan, John Sullivan being removed from the roster essentially, and his contract not being picked up. And so I felt like you got Brian Allen in there. I don't know if you love him, but he's there, and you probably feel comfortable with him among other guys. You'll be fine at center. But I thought that, tackle and guard in particular are the two ones that I looked at. Obviously, you lost a number of guys on the interior of your offensive line. Most notably, you had the guard move on from the Rams to Tennessee in free agency. And so Roger Saffold. And so obviously Jamon Brown was suspended early in the season. You kind of had already wrapped your brain around moving on from him anyway. He's moved on to Atlanta, I believe it is. Either way, Buffalo, Atlanta, doesn't matter. He's no longer a Ram. And so you're starting to see a lot of moving pieces and parts along the interior of this offensive line. So the question is, with the 37-year-old Andrew Whitworth and some moving parts on the inside of your offensive line, how do you stabilize that? By getting more depth, throwing as many darts at the dartboard as possible and seeing how many of these guys stick. So I thought it was imperative that you did something along the offensive line. And you start here in the third round with Bobby Evans, 6'4", 312 pounds, 35-inch arms. So he's got vines for arms. 40 career starts at Oklahoma, 26 of them at right tackle, 14 at left tackle, which all came in 2018. A possible swing tackle candidate with the temperament of a nasty interior offensive lineman, Bobby Evans was a solid cog on a veteran Oklahoma O-line. While Evans' below athleticism leaves him consistently vulnerable to speed off the edge, his length, technique, and strength make up for his athletic deficiencies. Evans could see the field potentially as a guard if a move inside could fast-track his ability to see the field, but it wouldn't shock me if the Rams said, nope, this guy's a tackle. We think very highly of him, and we're going to give him a shot to play tackle at the NFL level. I wouldn't have one problem with that. But if they said, you know what, we could use the help inside, we're going to go ahead and kick you inside the guard, wouldn't be opposed to that either. So here's my biggest problem with Bobby Evans. He can't play left tackle at the NFL level. He gets beat too consistently off the edge with speed. You watch him in the Alabama game, and Christian Miller was working his ass over. I'm talking about straight speed off the edge and a dip and a rip, and there was nothing that Bobby Evans could do about it. All right. Now, you put a big, burly 5-tech or a slow 4-3 base in front of him, he's going to block that guy all day long, twice on Sundays, Mondays, Thursdays, and some Saturdays. You put a speed rusher in front of him with elite quickness off the snap with a burst, and Bobby Evans is going to get his ass whooped. So what I'm telling you is he can't survive on the left side. He may be able to survive on the right side, but you're going to have the same problem, but at least the quarterback can see it coming, you know. But why put your quarterback in harm's way? I think if you need to get Bobby Evans on the field, kick his ass inside. So we'll see what happens with Bobby Evans, because I think there is a way he can play tackle at the next level. Right tackle, that is. Let me be specific. So I see him as a right tackle. My comp for him is another ex-Oklahoma Sooner in Darrell Williams, who was selected by the Carolina Panthers. Has been solid for them. Not great. Same thing I feel is going to be the outcome of Bobby Evans in this league. Solid, not great. You know, to me, of all the veterans on that Oklahoma offensive line, he was the one liability, I felt like. I thought the rest of those guys were lights out for the most part. He was a guy that I felt like you could beat him with some elite stuff. And so Evans, for me, is going to be a solid piece. I'm anxious to see what the Rams decide to do with him, what position they allow him to play, what they ask him to do, that sort of thing. But a solid football player nonetheless. In the third round, 97th overall selection, Oklahoma offensive lineman Bobby Evans for me is, and let's take offensive line off the board, as that was a major need for me coming into this draft. So we now move to the fourth round, 134th pick overall, defensive lineman out of Washington, Greg Gaines is the selection. So I told you when I talked about the needs of this team that you needed to get some depth. Not necessarily a guy that you're looking to start, but a guy that provides you with some depth, a guy that's a rotational piece. This is exactly what you did here in the fourth round with Greg Gaines. Is Greg Gaines a starter? Maybe 3-4 years down the road in a pinch if you need him to. Yeah, sure, why not? But you can probably do better than Greg Gaines, but what he is going to afford you is a guy that can come off the bench in a rotational situation, give your guys a spell, and you not have that big of a drop-off, especially if you're talking about stopping the run. Now, getting after the quarterback probably won't be on the field for many of those downs, but again, if you're talking about stopping the run on first and second down, Greg Gaines is your man. Let's take defensive line off the board. I saw that as one of your ancillary needs in this draft, and so you go ahead and take care of that here in the fourth round. 6'1", 312 pounds stands Greg Gaines. A stout, low center of gravity defensive tackle that plays with a motor switch stuck on high. Greg Gaines can be a rock inside, holding his ground at the point of attack, and on occasion using a well-timed swim move to knife into the backfield and be effective and disrupt plays. He can also be maddening at times because he can go absolutely silent. Go see the Arizona State game where, if you didn't know any better, Greg Gaines wasn't even on the field. He was a non-participant, but he was on the field. He just wasn't making any noise. All right. But then in the same breath, he can be a force. Go turn on the Cal game. Okay. Against California, he was outstanding. You know, those are the games that get him drafted in the fourth round. All right. I was like, whoa, this guy's impressive. So you just don't know which Greg Gaines you're going to get. Ultimately, what it all adds up to is a rotational depth piece in a 4-3 defensive scheme. And that's essentially what I see him being moving forward. My comp for him is Ryan Glasgow, a Michigan defensive lineman that was taken in the draft in the mid to late rounds by the Cincinnati Bengals. A really solid defensive lineman that is a rotational depth piece, a guy that you're not necessarily looking to start, but just looking to have him fill out your roster, give you some depth and some quality snaps when your starters need a blow. So that's what I see out of Greg Gaines. And again, at times I thought that the Rams weren't the type of aggressive team stopping the run that I thought they should have been. You know, especially in some of those late game situations or late season games. I thought you were able to be run on a little bit. And I think you could use some beef and some girth and some stoutness up front. And Greg Gaines is going to provide all of those things and maybe even a little bit more. So here in the 4th round, 134th pick overall, defensive lineman out of Washington, Greg Gaines for me is... So we move on to the 5th round now, 169th pick overall. Offensive lineman out of Wisconsin, David Edwards is the pick. So David Edwards is unlike your conventional Wisconsin offensive lineman. There are a couple of O-lineman factories in college football. Iowa's one. Wisconsin's one. Notre Dame is another. Places where you know if I go there and I get me a high-quality offensive lineman, I'm going to get some really good stuff from them. You should know your right tackle has been a rock for you in Rob Havenstein. You got him from Wisconsin. Generally, when you get stuff from Wisconsin, you can throw away the receipt along the offensive line because you know it works properly and you don't really need to take it back to the store and get your money back. So David Edwards is unique in the sense that he's not your standard run-of-the-mill Ryan Ramczyk or Rob Havenstein quality offensive lineman, a guy that's a technician that comes in the league ready to go day one, don't really have to do much but plug him and play him and let him go. This is a guy here that needs work. He's not a technician, and it's shocking because, again, there's a high standard and bar that's set for Wisconsin offensive linemen, but David Edwards doesn't necessarily meet that standard and bar. And I'll tell you why here in a second. But in any event, 6'6", 308 pounds, 31 career starts at right tackle for David Edwards. He's another candidate to kick inside to guard, probably out of necessity. Nonetheless, despite 31 career starts spanning over 3 seasons, David Edwards is a raw offensive lineman prospect who showed up on the Madison campus as a freshman quarterback. Yes, this guy was a quarterback, which then turned into tight end, which eventually morphed into him becoming an offensive tackle. So yes, that's a major leap from quarterback to tight end, from tight end to tackle. So you can understand now why this guy's a little rough around the edges and not quite what you're accustomed to getting from Wisconsin. That being said, thus his technical savvy, the technical savvy we've come to expect from Wisconsin isn't here. However, he did keep his quick feet because this is a guy that was a option QB in high school. He ran the veer. So this is a guy that was running quite a bit. So he's got good feet. But now it's up to the NFL coaching staff to get him up to speed in every other aspect of his game as an offensive lineman. His hand placement is poor. His body control is poor. And you know what was funny? I was watching him, and I'm like, why is this guy always on the ground? I'm not used to seeing that from Wisconsin offensive linemen. Every other play, he's picking himself up off the ground. It's not like he's cutting somebody. He's just on the ground and can't stay on his feet. And I'm like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? And I was like, he doesn't seem like a Wisconsin offensive lineman. And then it made sense when I started to get the background information and this guy switching multiple positions. It all started to make sense. So he's got a ways to go. Hand placement, body control, angles. You know, all of these things are things he's going to have to work on. But he's got good feet. And that's a good foundation from which to start. I'd just say kick his ass inside and keep it moving. You need help at guard. To me, he'd be the perfect guy to move inside. But again, you may get your hands on this guy, and he may end up being the best you got in terms of a backup option at tackle, potentially a starter in the future. And so we'll see. You never know, man. You never know with some of these guys. But in any event, fifth round, 169th overall selection, an offensive lineman out of Wisconsin, David Edwards, for me, is my comp for David Edwards is another guy that made a transition from a different position. He had less experience and was drafted higher, but I'm talking about Rick Leonard, offensive lineman out of Florida State that was drafted by the New Orleans Saints. And he was a guy that was a defensive lineman his entire career and then made the switch in his final year at Florida State. Played, I think, 13 games at tackle and ended up getting drafted in the third round, which was surprising. He was extremely raw, had a long way to go. I don't think David Edwards is as raw as Rick Leonard was, but it's the same premise, same concept, same kind of transition that needs to be made and some adjustments that need to be made to his game. Now we go to the seventh round. Rams had two late seventh rounders, the first of which 243rd overall defensive back out of Penn State, Nick Scott, is the pick. So I talk about this all the time, about in the later rounds, 6th and 7th preferably, that you take height, weight, speed specimens. You take guys with an injury history that are very talented. You take guys that have trouble off the field but are very talented. These are the times you take flyers on guys that have changed positions and they're really raw, but you see upside and potential if this guy can figure it out. These are the times you take small school prospects and guys that maybe underachieved in college, but they were outstanding 4- and 5-star high school prospects that just didn't figure it out at the college level, but you know there's talent in there and you want to get it out. 6th or 7th round is the time you do all of those things. And this is another example of a guy that had off the charts athleticism and really didn't show you a lot at Penn State at the safety position, but he's a standout special teams player and an outstanding athlete, and you're like, there's a place on the roster for a guy like this. And so you're really looking to take guys that you think, regardless of position, you may not need another tackle, you may not need another guard, you may not need another wide receiver or a corner or a linebacker, but if there's a talented guy and you think you can make your roster, you take him in the later rounds. And I think that's what you're doing here with Nick Scott. You may actually see potential in him as a safety. I didn't see much on tape that led me to believe that he's a guy that you're really considering at safety at this very moment. But you get him in your system. He gets some reps in practice. He continues to learn from guys like John Johnson and Eric Weddle, and maybe he turns into a really quality safety, especially with the athleticism that he possesses. 5'11", 201, 4'4", 340, 41-inch vert, 10.8 broad. All of these would have been in the top 5 percentile of his positional group at the combine. So you're talking about a guy with elite athleticism and a captain and a special team standout. So there's some qualities that he brings to the table, but the athleticism stands out above all else. A safety with off-the-charts athleticism, but will make an NFL roster based off of his special teams prowess. Was a special team standout in addition to a running back before making the switch to safety and continuing to dominate on specials. Also was a team leader and captain. So those things don't go unnoticed. When a guy's a special teams standout and a captain and a leader, and he's got the C on his jersey, those things don't go unnoticed. They can only help. But I think where his true value lies is that this guy was a maven on special teams. From the day he set foot on the Penn State campus, he was making an impact on special teams, and it only got better. He's blocking kicks. He's getting 8 and 10 tackles a season as a gunner. This is a guy that he's going to make plays as a special teams player. Those guys make NFL rosters. So I think there is a place on this roster for a guy like Nick Scott. He's going to have to prove himself, but if he's going to make the plays that he made at Penn State at the gunner position as a special team standout, whether he's blocking kicks or going down and covering kicks and making tackles, he's got a shot. He's got a shot. I don't think he's going to make this team as a safety right off the bat, but I think he can make this team as a special teams maven. We'll see. But here in the 7th round, 243rd overall selection, defensive back out of Penn State. Nick Scott for me is. And then we wrap up this draft in the 7th round, 251st pick overall, linebacker out of Texas Tech, Dakota Allen is the selection. So this one is a fascinating selection. I don't know if this is this is a feel-good story. Let's take this guy. We've seen the Rams do this in the past, different regime though. That was under the watch of Jeff Fisher when you took Michael Sam at the back end of a draft. And I have my reasons as to why that took place, but that's nor here nor there. Look, you're taking guys that you think can make a football team. Dakota Allen is actually a solid football player. He was invited to the combine, so it's not like he was a stiff. And I'm a huge fan. I can't speak for anybody out there. I'm a huge fan of Last Chance U on Netflix. Now, the season 3, the next season, or I guess this would be the 4th season because they did 2 seasons with the first school in East Mississippi, and they did 1 season at the new school with the crazy coach. And I think they're going to do another season there. And I heard he actually got fired. So, and it wouldn't shock me if he did. But again, I'm going off on a tangent. If you watched I believe it was season 2 that Dakota Allen was on the show at East Mississippi. He was a beast for them. And he told his story about how he got caught up in the wrong group, ended up getting brought up on burglary and home invasion charges and all of that stuff. And got dismissed from the Texas Tech campus and team, and found himself at East Mississippi. And he realized that, he had made a really tragic mistake in his life, and he needed to turn things around. He did it on the field. He did it off the field. I'm assuming that the people at Texas Tech watched the program, saw this dude, said, you know what, we know Dakota's a great kid, and he was remorseful and said all the right things. He talked about on the show how he would love to go back to Texas Tech, how he missed the program and how he had realized the error in his ways. And so he ended up getting an opportunity to go back to Texas Tech. It worked out there. He ended up being a team captain, played well for them, was their leading tackler, did a lot of good things for them. I thought his 2017 tape was way better than his 2018 tape. But again, it's a feel-good story. How can you not root for this guy to, 1, make this team, and 2, be productive? But as a 7th round pick, he's a long shot. But I talked about linebacker being a position that they needed depth. He's the only linebacker they took in this draft. So he's got a shot from that standpoint. Let's take linebacker off the board. Dakota Allen is a 6'1", 234-pound or 37-pound, 32-pound, somewhere in that general vicinity linebacker. He ran a 4.77, so not the fastest guy in the world. You would have loved to have seen him. Again, I always say, if you're sub 240 in terms of weight, you need to be running a sub 4.7, period. End of discussion. You get into the, 242, 245 pound range, you running a 4.75, 4.77. I get it. You're a big man. You 232 like Dakota Allen is, you probably need to be running at 4.65, bro. So running a 4.77 doesn't do him any favors, but speed isn't his game. His game is predicated on smarts, instincts, and physicality. And this guy's tough as nails. He'll come downhill. He'll hit you. He'll take on blocks. I think he understands zone drops and the concepts behind dropping into zone coverage. I just don't think he's athletic enough to take advantage of some of the opportunities that his eyes see, but I don't know if his body moves fast enough to take advantage of some of the opportunities that he potentially could have if he was just a little bit faster. I didn't love the way they utilized him in 2018. I thought they were too passive-aggressive with a guy that is a really aggressive defender. A lot of times he's just kind of sitting over the ball, just waiting, kind of keying in on quarterbacks' eyes, almost like a robber, so to speak, over the middle of the football field. I'd much rather have this guy going downhill, much rather have this guy being a blitzer, just being aggressive. That's his nature. But in any event, maybe you get the most out of him. Maybe you are able to first utilize him on special teams because that's how he's going to make this football team as a special teams standout. But, eventually he'll work his way onto the field and And maybe you use him in some situations where you blitz him. Maybe you use him in some first and second down situations as a run defender because he's really good at that. He finds the football. I don't know. I mean, he's a solid football player. You know, he's not a guy that's going to stand out necessarily, but I think he's a guy that I think you can find a way to find a roster spot for him if he performs at the level that I think he's capable of. But I'm rooting for him. Obviously, him being the first player I've ever seen to get drafted from Last Chance U, and there's been a number of guys that you've seen on the program that were highly touted out of high school, made a mistake or didn't have the grades or whatever the case may be, ended up at one of these JUCOs looking to transfer to a major D1 program, but they never make it out of the NFL. Another guy, if you are a Last Chance U fan, and I thought this was interesting, if you remember Ali, Ali out of the first season of Last Chance U as a defensive tackle. And remember, if you watched the follow-up, they had a follow-up last year with him and the counselor and all of those people that were in one of the earlier years and seasons. Ronald Ali actually was picked up as an undrafted free agent by the Oakland Raiders. So he's going to get a chance to make an NFL roster as well. And, you know, they've had a lot of turnover in Oakland, and he's going to get an opportunity. So some of these Last Chance U guys actually getting an opportunity. The running back last year, or a couple of years ago at East Mississippi, he was at Arkansas. He actually had a really good season at Arkansas. So some of these guys are really talented football players, and they're getting opportunities. And it wouldn't shock me if that same running back I'm talking about that was at Arkansas, that was at East Mississippi in season 2, it wouldn't shock me if he got drafted in the NFL next year, because he's a senior this year and he was outstanding for the Razorbacks in 2018. So I'm just saying, I know some of you aren't Last Chance U fans, don't even know what I'm talking about. I am a massive Last Chance U fan. And so it's good to see a guy like Dakota Allen get an opportunity here in the 7th round, 251st pick overall, linebacker out of Texas Tech. Dakota Allen for me is so, as you can see, the Rams pretty much took care of every single need that I had for them in this draft. And again, none of the needs were really that dire. Again, this is a team that has done a really good job of taking care of any glaring needs in free agency, adding Clay Matthews as an edge rusher, so that's not a big need right now, but I think eventually you're going to have to address edge rusher. But you bring in Clay Matthews as a veteran that's looking to win. You bring in Eric Weddle as a veteran at the safety position that's looking to win. And so those are temporary Band-Aids on positions that you're going to eventually have to address. Obviously, losing LaMarcus Joyner, you bring in another veteran in Weddle to fill that void. But eventually, Weddle isn't going to be as productive, and you're going to have to move on. It's only a 2-year deal. Same can be said with Clay Matthews, only a 2-year deal. You don't, or maybe his is a 3-year deal. But you don't expect a lot out of. I thought Clay Matthews fell off a cliff 2 years ago. So I don't even know what you're going to get. Maybe you get a rejuvenated Clay Matthews now that he's in a situation where he realizes career coming up close to an end. I'm at home now in Southern Cal. I got a chance to win a Super Bowl. I'm going to have to give it my best effort. Not to say that he wasn't before, but maybe you get a rejuvenated Clay Matthews. But I thought his best football was behind him 2 years ago. So I don't know what you're getting there, but you've done a really good job of making sure you stay ahead of the curve. You need offensive tackle help. You got Andrew Whitworth for another year. What do? You draft Joseph Noteboom last year. You draft 2 more tackles this year. We'll see what happens. You have some issues at other positions like corner. I said, hey, look, man, you got 2 corners that you traded for last year. Their contracts are going to be up after the 19 season. What do? You take David Long in this draft. So you've done a good job staying ahead of the curve. And so this is what I think you've done here in this draft, score-wise. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but my comp for Dakota Allen is Vince Williams, just as a side note. But in any event, that's going to do it for the Rams in their 2019 NFL Draft Wrap-Up. As a matter of fact, that's going to do it for the entire series. It's been fun. It's been a very efficient process. I'm really pleased with the way this went. Thank you to all of you who participated in trying to get your team or some team up, for that matter, up first in the series. It's always fun to watch you guys compete and try to be first. And so another year in the books of the draft wrap-up series here on the Louie Tee Network. I'm shocked that the Rams were last, but that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. And that's the Super Bowl slumber, we're going to call it. In any event, I'm your man Louie T signing off. Remember, if it's not your man T, it's not the best NFL coverage it could be. Also, remember to subscribe to the Louie Tee Network. Turn those notifications on so you don't miss a thing when it comes to all 32 teams in the National Football League, as we'll be diving in deep to the NFL season. And we're going to start very shortly, as training camp is right around the corner. So you don't want to miss a thing here on the Louie Tee Network. And also check out the Louie Tee Network podcast, available on Stitcher, Google Music Play, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, and of course the website, LouieTeeNetwork.net. A lot of great content there. Louie Tee Network podcast. Check it out. Thank you guys for all of your support during this series. Make sure you like the video. And until next time, I'm your man Louie T, signing off. Have a good one. Louie T.